I've been replaying Sonic Adventure 2 recently, and I was thinking a lot about Shadow and how fans came to love him. I thought about how Sega built up the hype around him by making him this mysterious new character, and then I thought about how he was actually portrayed in-game. Needless to say, I remembered just why I loved Shadow back when I was an early Sonic fan. Shadow was introduced as a villain. He was a bad guy who wanted to destroy the planet. And early on in the game's dark story, we find out that Shadow is actually trying to avenge a deceased friend. Throughout the game, we learn more of his past and the tragedy, and Shadow goes from being an evil government weapon to being someone who was completely misunderstood. Not by the player, but by those who hurt him in the first place. He actually seems like a nice person at heart, who was just a little angry, since his memory of the Ark tragedy was still very recent due to him being asleep for 50 years. I'll admit that this is something I actually miss about Shadow, and it's why I don't really care for him anymore. Shadow was actually nice. His design makes him look like an evil Sonic, but that wasn't his purpose. That was Sega's way of misleading the player into believing that Shadow was just a dark version of Sonic. But in reality, he was heavily misunderstood. He was seen as a dangerous weapon, when really, he was invented primarily to cure a 12-year-old girl of a disease, and his secondary purpose was to protect mankind and bring peace. Nowadays, Sega are no longer misleading the player when showing Shadow to be some dark Sonic, because that's what they've turned him into. He is now known as a character who mercilessly kills those who might oppose him, and he's sometimes just aggressive and rude for no real reason. And that's why I just don't really like him anymore. I feel like Sega have turned him into his facade from Sonic Adventure 2, rather than the character he developed into. So, if we take a good look at Shadow's character in Sonic Adventure 2, we watch him go from bad to good. His evil motives are personal, and he remembers that his hatred isn't the answer to his problems. Plus, he remembers his real promise to Maria, and from there, he decides to save the people of Earth and, in the end, die by using up all of his strength. Until fans demanded for him to be brought back, that is! That's another thing about Shadow. Fans wanted him back. Fans adored this character. If he wasn't as loved as he was, then he would have stayed dead. Now then, let's take a look at the character of Infinite from Sonic Forces. You might think that this is a weird thing to talk about, but actually I can see a lot of wasted potential here. Infinite is a character who can essentially only appear once due to the Phantom Ruby going back to the other dimension, and that ruby forms his identity. His theme song in Sonic Forces is about his identity, which he built around this ruby. What I'm trying to say is that Infinite's identity in Sonic Forces was a one-off event which could have served as a great introduction to a permanent character, much like with Shadow. He could be seen as a monster who was trying to destroy the world, mainly out of his own anger, which is again, like Shadow, but to secure Infinite's place in the cast of recurring characters, Sega should have done one thing. Brought in Zero. Zero is a name most people call Infinite's real form, which has been seen briefly in episode Shadow and in the Sonic Forces prequel comic. Zero was his own character with his own story, and honestly, seeing his personal conflicts would have been interesting. I was actually talking to my younger brother about a scenario which I really think should have played out in the game. Imagine this. Sonic and the Avatar defeat Infinite in the third battle, and Infinite gets called back to the fortress against his will. In Sonic Forces, this is the last thing we see of him. Eggman takes the ruby for himself, and Infinite is gone. In this idea, however, Infinite is instead only taken temporarily off screen, and Eggman now has the ruby. The other characters all look horrified that Eggman has become stronger than Infinite by overclocking the Phantom Ruby, and they have no idea how to stop it. But then, walking up to the Resistance is Infinite himself. He takes off his mask, revealing the face everyone wanted to see in-game, and he offers to help since Eggman betrayed him. At this point, with it being the finale of the game, Infinite would be giving up his identity as Infinite, and would instead be reclaiming his identity as Zero. During the boss fight, Zero would be the one on the radio, giving the characters hints towards the weak spot, because, after all, he understands the Phantom Ruby better than anyone else, and would also have some understanding of how Eggman's robot worked. Then, at the end of the game, Zero's help would be acknowledged, and maybe he'd even thank the Avatar or something before going off on his own somewhere. The reason I think this idea would be so effective is because it makes it 100% possible for Infinite to return, just not as the same character. it's harder for him to return when Sega seemed to prefer his Infinite persona over his Zero persona, and while Infinite is obviously cool, this form of his feels so temporary in comparison to Zero. Zero feels like someone who should come back, and he should have had a turning point in the game which resembled Shadow's from Sonic Adventure 2. Also, it is worth mentioning that the hype for this guy was similar to the hype for Shadow. Fans wanted to know what his deal was, but instead they were given a generic villain who, despite his great potential, became nothing more than a side character until he was just removed from the story completely. If he was a well-developed character, like with Shadow, then fans would be begging for him to come back. And that improvement alone would have made Sonic Forces much more memorable and maybe even loved. Just like how Mephiles won the hearts of fans in Sonic 06. Except he was designed to be pure evil, while Infinite really doesn't seem like someone who should be going down that path. He really does feel like Shadow because of his past tragedy, and I've mentioned in previous videos that Sega never addressed his real self because they hid it behind a mask, with that mask making Infinite feel like someone else. Taking off the mask would have been a huge development for him as a character, and it was something which should have been done given the circumstances of the story. Lots of people like to go into great detail when discussing how Infinite should have been changed, but honestly, a little scene like the one I just described would have worked massively in the favour of Sonic Forces, even with his current plot. The only other thing I would suggest is what everyone else has been suggesting: focus. Infinite's cutscenes were extremely short, and, even though he had his disagreements with Eggman, he never once really threatened to betray him. Shadow had long cutscenes, and quite a few were dedicated to him and his own motives, while Infinite is simply there to obey Eggman and be mean to Sonic and the Avatar. If there had been a scene where he murmured the names of his squad members, or actually had a flashback, much like Shadow did with Maria, then that would be awesome. It would have been even better if in episode Shadow we actually got a cutscene where Shadow encountered the squad, possibly even fought them in a boss battle or in level. And then, as one of them died, Zero made his appearance. Perhaps the squad should have been defeated in a simple cutscene, or maybe in the level, and the real boss fight should have been Zero. And of course, Infinite's motivation to change himself should have been because Shadow wrecked his squad, not because Shadow implied that he was weak. He didn't even say it, Infinite made that up. It might all sound a little dark, but that was the tone Sonic Forces was trying to go for, and it really would have resembled Sonic Adventure, or even the old Sonic cartoons where Robotnik took over most of the planets. So in summary, this is how Infinite's development should have looked, starting from episode Shadow. Squad Jackal gets defeated. Zero shows up to kill Shadow for what he has done. Shadow beats Zero in a boss fight, Sonic Adventure 2 style. Zero declares that he will get revenge and allows Eggman to experiment on him. Infinite attacks Shadow with his new powers and then goes after Sonic. Infinite beats Sonic and thus helps Eggman take over the world while slaughtering civilians and soldiers alike. Infinite battles Sonic later in game when Sonic tracks him down, and he leaves Sonic alive. Eggman shows that he is displeased with Infinite letting him live, and Infinite displays possible signs of frustration to foreshadow him turning against Eggman. Infinite battles the resistance in the city. Perhaps clones of him could be seen fighting with soldiers, rather than the whole level feeling like the Avatar is the only one being targeted. Infinite catches the Avatar out and fights him, but expresses slight empathy when recognizing him, so chooses to let him live when he has a chance to kill him. This would be something the Avatar would remember. Infinite sends Sonic and the Avatar to null space, and upon seeing how the Avatar practically chooses to die with Sonic, he reminds himself that friends don't give you strength, and then leaves. Sonic and the Avatar meet Eggman on top of the tower after escaping null space, and Infinite looks mildly impressed that they were able to return. He gives them some sort of mocking praise before following after Eggman. Infinite and Eggman get into an argument about what should be done next with the Resistance after the Death Egg is destroyed, with Infinite blaming Eggman, but to prevent Infinite from trying to attack him, Eggman reveals a control device which hurts him at the press of a button. This control shows why he is confident that he has full control and power over Infinite, and it's linked to the Phantom Ruby itself, since Eggman did spend a lot of time analysing it. Infinite does the usual thing where he summons the sun in an attempt to wipe out the Resistance, but he notes to himself that he could also get rid of Eggman using such an attack. The Avatar gets rid of the sun, much to Infinite's anger, and Sonic challenges him to a final showdown. Instead of having a reskin of the Metal Sonic boss fight, Infinite is shown to be much weaker and he is really pushing himself to his limits, stating that he cannot afford to lose. The Avatar joins the fight when Infinite's strength returns, and as he is being defeated, he comes to realize that Sonic and the Avatar are actually stronger because of their friendship and teamwork. The usual cutscene takes place where Infinite gets defeated and Sonic mocks him, and then he is taken back to Eggman's base. Instead of this being his final scene in the game, he is then shown having the ruby taken from him by force because he can no longer be trusted with it, and Eggman states that Infinite will die along with the Resistance because he is weak. These words give Infinite a flashback to his squad, remembering that they died defending Eggman's base, and remembering that he also failed them. This is the last we see of him until the final boss. Eggman's robot appears and the Resistance panic, since he's overclocking the Phantom Ruby and he has essentially become stronger than Infinite. Infinite reveals himself to the Resistance, who look ready to fight him, but he takes off his mask and offers to help. When questioned about this, he states that Eggman betrayed him and that he simply wasn't worth fighting for. The Avatar, having remembered Infinite's small act of mercy from before, nods to the others, showing that he is willing to listen to Infinite. Infinite tells Sonic, Classic Sonic, and the Avatar that he is not strong enough to fight the robots, but they are. During the boss fight, Infinite uses the radio to communicate to Classic Sonic and the Avatar to tell them about the robot's weakness. When the second robot begins to emerge, Infinite warns that the characters are about to enter null space and wishes them luck before the radio glitches out. After the battle, Classic Sonic disappears and everyone is of course really happy. Infinite gets thanked for his help, and the Avatar even offers him a fist bump, which Infinite accepts. He says that Sonic and his friends aren't so annoying after all, and Sonic says that he could say the same for him, but when he addresses Infinite by his name, Infinite tells him that he's actually called Zero. Infinite would then be shown helping clean up the mess he caused, probably with someone like Amy doing it with him, and that would be the last we see of him before the game ends. So that's all I have to say about the potential path Infinite could have gone down. He definitely should have had his edge factor boosted up instead of toned down, and he should have really been given some time to develop, much like Shadow from Sonic Adventure 2. Or if Sega really wanted to keep Infinite as a villain, they should have developed him in a similar way to Mephiles, or maybe even Metal Sonic from Sonic Heroes. Either way, his character felt like he was floating in an awkward place, and Sega were holding back with him too much rather than going all out. Anyway, with my thoughts all out, what do you guys think? Feel free to share your ideas with each other down below. What should Infinite's story have looked like? Or do some of you prefer how he's portrayed in Sonic Forces? This has been Lord Danny, signing out.